Today on AI Actually, AI pilot failures, agent disruption, and the AI talent war.
AI is both overhyped and underhyped in that scenario. Right? There's so much expectation that AI could do anything.
Agree. It starts with a business problem. It doesn't start with a technology. And there are infinite business problems out there.
The reality is it makes it cheaper to use that stuff, so then you need even more of it, right? So the paradox is, even though you got more efficient, the demand went up.
Hey gang, happy Friday. Good to see everybody. Getting ready to head into the long weekend. We've got actually a new face with us, but I'll go around the horn. I'm Pete Riley. I'm sort of your friendly neighborhood moderator for the day. Of course, we've got Mike Finley, our chief technical officer and guru of all things AI. We've got Jim Johnson, who runs our services team, spends a lot of his days working with our clients, and the new face is Alon Goren, who is been our faithful leader, for the last I don't know, since 2013. So we're going to come back to Alon we want a little bit of his backstory, so everybody sort of has a little bit more background on Alon. But here's the topics we're going to jump into today. Is the one, and we hit on this last week. Everybody's drowning in sort of these AI pilots now. We had the MIT study that's probably world famous now that sort of claimed this 95% fail rate. Not exactly sure, if all the data is exactly correct, but I do think it's a good indicator that people are struggling. So we're going to talk about what actually makes a good use case that delivers value, not just a demo. Then we're going to jump into AI agents, right? So are they co-pilots? Are they competitors, for your job? And then we're going to jump into the AI talent wars. You got Meta paying, massive salaries for folks. And what does that mean to the rest of us? So we'll sort of jump into that. So those are the topics. But before we do that, I want to welcome Alon to the podcast. And Alon, would love to get a little bit of your backstory for the group here before we get started.
Great. Thanks, Pete. How many minutes do we have? All right.
Not enough.
I'll take a few.
Yeah, not enough to cover your background.
Not enough for you.
I'll give you the super short version. Got started in technology back when it was pre-PC era. So learned a little bit about how computers work before they were actually useful for very much other than maybe like building things that kept your grades at school. And kind of got involved with figuring out how to build software that people could use first in gaming. So gaming was the original passion, building video games on Ataris. And then later, figuring out how to build software that helped you run companies, right? Everything from typically in the small business space, but we did everything from car dealerships to doctor offices. Eventually, that passion translated to forming SoftSense and then Radiant. So those were eventually went public at Radiant, and we built a nice company that was able to service lots of different verticals, right? And so learned a ton along the way about how to build a company, how to build technology, how to apply the technology so that the company can be successful. And then at some point in the early 2012 or so, after we sold Radiance, right, we hopped on the bandwagon of saying, hey, in fact, I remember my sister telling me this recently. She's like, yeah, you explained to me this term AI, and I didn't really understand it in 2012. Ironically, AI was kind of a term before ML really took over right around those, right? And the whole idea was, listen, it's too hard to work with computers. Why should I have to figure out how a computer wants to do something? Why can a computer figure out what I want to do? So instead of learning an application, could the computer understand my workflow and just help me do that? So started with a science project that led us to building AnswerRocket and the Max technology today. Obviously, lots of pivots over time. We were way too early with our initial natural language processing kind of technology, but I think the vision was right. The vision of having computers better understand having computers understand you versus the other way around. And so now in the last few years, we've obviously been deploying large language models to accomplish that goal with much better success and much better access to a broader market than what you could with the very highly customized stuff we had to do previously. So that's not so much my own personal story as much as
You were way ahead of your time, and remember well in 2013 when you called me and you sort of described this problem. I think you said, "Oh, I'm in a board meeting and I might get a chart of some sales," and you'd ask for it by product, and the person presenting would say, "Well, I don't have it," and I'd send it to you, and you'd get a spreadsheet 2 weeks later, but yet you could make a dinner reservation for your phone, and that was sort of the inspiration.
Yeah.
I was fired up
That's
about it. Well,
That's an easy story to tell because the technology was so crappy, like
Yeah.
in that era, or like the enterprise technology just didn't at all match even Siri. That Siri never got really all that good, but it
Yeah.
showed you what's possible. In fact, I'd say it was like the Watson Jeopardy to me really stuck out as like, holy shit, that Watson can actually
Right.
answer these Jeopardy questions. How do they do that, right? And then obviously the techniques they used to do that not scalable, but it definitely showed the future of what's possible.
And LLMs have finally sort of emerged to make a lot of that a lot more possible. So,
Yeah.
My key takeaway here from Alon's narrative there is that everything done before the PC was sort of worthless or irrelevant, despite the fact that all the world financial services systems, insurance, et cetera, are still running on that technology today.
Yeah,
But it was all irrelevant.
Right.
And it's all still working.
It was irrelevant to me. I couldn't do anything with it.
All right, so let's jump in. So first thing we're going to talk about is, look, MIT, there's this MIT study, right? A bunch of pilots are failing. So what's separating sort of the toys from the tools, right? What Jim, and I know you're spending a ton of time with clients these days. Let's start with you and your perspective there.
I mean, the MIT study is super interesting on many levels, maybe for what it is and for what it isn't. And we can all, there's a little bit of skepticism maybe to apply there, given the authorship and ownership of it. And, everything you sort of need to understand, people have an axe to grind potentially and a perspective. But I think there is some truth to it, especially if you look at sort of where they say, whether it's 5% or 10% or 20%, doesn't really matter. But the points they made about where the value is being derived or where there is success, and we talked about this a little bit in a previous episode, is it starts with a business problem. It doesn't start with a technology. And there are infinite business problems out there. And you can sort of start to look at it and say, you put in the phrase, I wish. I wish this could go faster, or I wish this was, I didn't have to do this because it's repetitive, or I wish we could do this all the time, or I wish we had 100 of these. Anytime you can start to put that sort of phrasing in front of a business problem, then you can ask yourself, well, maybe we've automated it already, that's fine, but likely you didn't automate it or you weren't successful because you didn't have the power of AI. That represents a place where you might be able to put in AI, put in the brain of an AI and say, hey, now we can do something. Now there's the smarts around non-deterministic, a place where we didn't have the technology to handle a non-deterministic business situation, where we can apply AI now. And that's the place to start looking under the hood.
Yeah, Jim, you've done some work with clients to help them sort of answer this question, right? What does that look like? And B, what's been surprising to you in all that?
Well, a couple things. One, what is surprising and never ceases to amaze me is I mean, I think there are a lot of business executives right now, and I've said this to you before, who are a little bit bordering on negligence. And I know that's probably an accusatory or pretty strong statement, but negligence in just getting enough AI understanding. So there's either folks who are sort of saying, I'm going to totally ignore this and hope it goes away, or there's folks who think, hey, AI is just magic. I'm just going to expose all my data to it, or a vast amount, and it's going to give me answers that have never been there before. And the answers needs to be somewhere in the middle. It's crazy.
I think
Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
You're onto something there. Like what other technology do the people that are trying to use it challenge it and say, but why doesn't it work better? In other words, so much with AI, I tell people, look, it's not a calculator. Don't use it like one. It's not a database. Don't use it like one. And the answer, instead of saying, oh, I should use a database where there's a database, they say, well, why doesn't it work better? Well, there's just this assumption that it's just a brain, just like any brain would be. And therefore, if I drop a problem into the brain will answer. And the reality is you have to treat it as very much a useful but a very unique animal in this world.
Mike, I think the interesting thing here is that AI is both overhyped and underhyped in that scenario. Right? There's so much expectation that AI could do
Totally
anything.
agree.
Um, you know, at the same time, while it might be able to, it's not trivial to make it do the thing that you think it might be able to do. So on some extremes, like AI is impressive in how it could write a narrative, and given the facts, it might even get that narrative right, right? But it's also perfectly happy to write a narrative that's entirely false. And so conquering taking AI and conquering it for the purpose of delivering, some deterministic goal that you have at the end of the day, like increasing profits, right, is a very meandering path to get there. And unless you could say, here is the exact way that I get to, improving profits, you've got a long journey ahead of you to discover, well, how do I apply AI in the relevant tasks that could be automated to make me more efficient or to drive the end goal. And the techniques to achieve that still require careful consideration in terms of understanding the process, building the scaffolding so that the AI ultimately knows what to do, because it can only react to the context that it's provided, right? And if that context isn't the right context, you're not going to get a good solution out of that AI.
But the easiest way to be successful is to get very, very narrow in your definition. Go as deep as you need to, but be super narrow in that decisioning where it is non-deterministic, and then slowly expand it. Don't start with sort of this super wide problem like how do I get to more profits? Start with, okay, hey, we're dealing with a whole bunch of invoices inbounding, and we've got a whole bunch of people, a large number of people who have to process those. Can we sort of ingest that, have the AI look at the invoice and decide we should pay this or not? Let's get it really narrow, or maybe even a class of invoices. Let's start there, have some success, and then widen.
I think for me, the analog there is if you hired a brand new person and you threw them into the mix and said, go ahead and solve this difficult problem for our company, right? Your expectation should be that AI will do roughly that. It'll do whatever a naive person might show up and try to do. And so it's all about educating, right? Having the continuous learning of some kind that happens. And if you reference back to that MIT study, and they mentioned learning like 20 plus times in that, right? There's this magic thing that if you could get it to learn what you're trying to do, it's going to work much better. And learning doesn't mean necessarily that it's just discovering and it's learning. But you have to engineer learning into the AI agent. It's not a thing you get for free today. So I think that's the parallel to a brand new hire, right, that you throw into the mix. No matter how smart they are, you're going to have to give them training. You're going to have to tell them this is right, this is wrong. You have to iterate with any new entity that you expect to be able to accomplish a goal on your behalf.
Alon, I'm curious how you would sort of advise a company about. I mean, obviously trying to find ROI, and they're trying to find what are the right use cases to chase. But there's also this aspect of this technology is changing literally every month in a pretty significant way. If you're a company, any large enterprise, how would you approach sort of balancing those things, maximizing my ROI, but also staying on top of the latest in developments and experimenting with those and bringing those forward?
Right.
How should you think about
that? Well, I would tell you what not to do first. What not to do is not sit on the sideline and wait until it's perfect, because that's a surefire disaster, because somebody else will figure that out before you if you're waiting for the perfect moment. So then it becomes a question of, okay, where do we think there are viable projects? And I think you end up sorting them into things that are sort of tactical and easy, but maybe the payoff is not that huge. And then sort of upper right quadrant types of projects that are much more aspirational, but a much higher impact. And I think you want a mix of those kinds of projects, in the sense that you should be thinking ahead to what does my industry look like, a few years from now, if AI in fact continues the curve it's on. And how do I meet that future by starting the work on re-engineering processes, thinking about where things that are highly manual today, that could be, if you had an infinite number of smart interns that you could train up, what would you train them on doing on your behalf? Meanwhile, there's probably some low-hanging fruit, right? So some of the low-hanging fruit may be, make sure you've got good adoption of, let's say, development organization, right, of the latest engineering tools, in the customer services area, in processes that you can map out today and can say, okay, here's the touch points in this process, and there's not a lot of learning that I would have to bring somebody on board to teach them how to do this process. Those are sort of very logical places to start.
Well, the other thing I would add to that is, if you're sort of just starting down this path, whether you're a medium-sized business, large business, recognize that from a technology standpoint, it's unlikely that you're going to architect or sort of decide on a set of tooling that is going to be the answer for years. And that's historically been the pattern where people were able to settle on an architecture. We got it. Now we'll just, we'll sort of scaffold up from there, which is why I believe that ROI is actually the only future proofing right now. If you think you're going to future proof from a technology standpoint, I would be wary of that. Mike, let me know if you disagree with this, because I sort of see you shaking your head there. But I think there's a good chance you may throw away the technology 12 months from now and re-implement or re-solve the same problem better, faster, easier, which is that you solve today.
I think that's why people are not starting and sitting on the sidelines. They're afraid to do that.
They don't know when to start.
I agree.
Yeah. Look, the fact is, if you go to some of the basics, some of the fundamental building blocks, the OpenAI SDK or the Pydantic tool calling definitions, these are really atomic things in the AI world. They are consistent for the last 24 months, right? They have not changed. Now, if you float up that stack and you start using some of the higher level components and you start kind of giving up more control, then you do find that, you are in a sort of a flavor of the month thing, and you're betting that the thing you're focused on is the one that's going to take off and really take shape. So that's kind of.
But you may build something today that GPT 7.0 or GPT 7 can do, and you never needed to invest in building it.
So a couple of things to add there. The one thing is the cost of reinventing software is much lower than it used to be. So it used to take us, let's say, some solid work to build a decent prototype. So you might spend a month, 2 months building what looks like a good prototype that answers the question, what does this software do, to somebody who could see it. And now you could do that, in a matter of days. And so, and then to the extent I want to migrate something, I've built something and now I want to change the underlying technology. That used to be a major migration effort. Now it's quite a bit more accelerated. If you do a good job, the AI assistants help you build test cases for the software you've got, help you try to automate some of the migration pains and rebuild a new system. So I think being afraid of throwing away software is not the reason, or it's much less of an obstacle, I think, in the calculation of whether you should pursue things now.
And there's some things.
The other thing that's fascinating is, last thing I will add is what's interesting is when you get down to the using AI assistants to build stuff, they tend to favor things that are highly documented. And so ironically, like even building like recently, another implementation of a chat agent, it wants to use the chat completion code. And if I really tell it hard, no, use the new client response API, don't use the chat completion. It's reluctant to do it almost. Like it kind of keeps pulling back to like, oh no, here's the stuff that's highly documented that I know how to do. And so I think there is this interesting dichotomy here where you want to lean into the AI assistants, which means they're wanting to use the things they've been trained on, even if you provide them documentation to sort of steer them in a different direction. So you kind of end up with the stuff that works.
What you're pointing out there is a fundamental principle of neural networks, right? And in neural networks, there is a training bias. If it is trained 10 times on one thing and one time on another, it's almost naturally going to select that first one more often. And this is a key reason why people interacting with language models can actually have a leg up, because a model might discover something that's happening in your business, but it's still going to be timid about exploiting that opportunity. While a human looks at it and says, oh my gosh, that's a really cool insight. We're sort of, our mammal brain is somewhat unburdened by how many times we've heard the same message over and over. And instead we can focus on taking that new thing and running with it. Right. So it's an important difference.
Yeah. I'm going to try to bring it back into just sort of wrapping up, I think, this whole idea. I'll try to put a bow on it, and you guys have other things to add. I guess I would say, get started. If you're sitting on the sidelines, you're probably, you're too late. Get in the game. And number two, I would say what I heard you say, Alon, is like, look, don't start with the hardest use case. Start with, there's low hanging fruit that is high value and more easily done and highly viable. Then that as you gain more skill, sort of move up the ladder in terms of that value viability matrix. And of course, you need to build the value viability matrix as you go through your business processes, and then and then repeat, and don't be afraid to throw something away and let that stop you from getting started. You guys
Pete,
have
can I
anything
just
to that?
inject? I just want to inject something because I think it is really highly relevant here. Is look, there are evergreens in this world. There are things that are valuable no matter what technology changes, right? And so in the limit, if you look at the limit of where AI is going, and you say, yep, at the end, you're not going to need anything that's any code or any technology. It's all going to be inside the AI. It's still going to need two things from us. Number one, it's going to need all the tacit knowledge that we have in our heads, right? How does this database work? Which columns work with which other ones? How do you aggregate? What do you do when there's a competitor price war in a small market, right? So grabbing all that documentation, and I don't care if you write it on the back of candy bar wrappers, right? Put it away. And then the other one is working cases.
I think
When this happens,
I would say I would say that's a good sort of segue into sort of the next segment, which you wanted to talk about agents in the workforce, right? So the new interns or new layoffs or what? And because we're hearing all sorts of things about, are they the scapegoat for layoffs? Are they really the reason for layoffs? Are they the reason for new sort of graduates not getting hired and so on? And so, Mike, I'd like to sort of turn that over to you and sort of get your initial thinking on that.
On the AI layoffs topic, yeah, for sure. So look, there's
just how do you see agents in the workforce? I'm in the workforce. I heard this thing, agents are coming.
Right.
How should I be thinking?
Yeah,
about
no,
that?
Look, my whole career, and yes, Jim, it's just since the time of PCs. Sorry, I don't know much about anything before that. But my whole career.
Come on, man! I touched the green screens.
Yeah, there you go. We have talked about the idea of this automation of technology will bring about this reduction in labor. It's a natural, because labor is a huge part of the cost for a business. Now, the reality is, in a lot of those implementations, the businesses grew as a result of the technology, right? It's a little bit of a Jevons paradox in that sense. They didn't get smaller. They didn't fire those people. Usually the technology does find, for example, and when I was working in the retail industry, it found fraud, and those people did have to go, but not the performance-oriented loss of
Hey, Mike,
workforce.
could you pause for a second and describe Jevons paradox for those who haven't heard that term?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, sorry for that. So yeah, Jevons paradox is just the observation that when efficiency improves, right? So let's say you're using a resource and you get a lot more efficient at it. And the original example is like coal and engines and steam stuff. When efficiency improves, you think you would need less of the stuff because, it's more efficient now. The reality is it makes it cheaper to use that stuff. So then you need even more of it, right? So the paradox is, even though you got more efficient, the demand went up, right? And that's exactly what happened.
Steam engines got more efficient. Steam engines got more efficient, but we needed more, we demanded a lot more coal.
Yeah, because we had a lot more steam engines. Because suddenly these steam engines are really cool, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Sorry. Go on. We wanted to make sure.
So anyway, I mean, look, they're the famous cases of Klarna firing a bunch of people that were on their help desk, or Commonwealth Bank is another one. These things.
They famously hired a bunch back, by the way.
Right. No, that's
didn't
exactly
work out.
The point, right? Where they're trying to make some headlines by being the ones that fired people, and then they end up being bitten by that and hiring those folks back and regretting it. And so I think this is no different than when we outsourced a lot of technology back in the early 2000s. It's no different than when the internet introduced a lot of efficiencies and suddenly software didn't have to be kept in service, right? Like, these things do change the way that industry works, right? They do impact productivity, but they don't radically throw away the people or the tech that was there before. They become a layer on top of it.
I'm going to disagree with Mike, just for the sake of taking the other side here. So I think this will be the largest disruption over the next decade that we've seen, certainly in our lifetimes. I think a lot of jobs will go away. What happens when those jobs go away is, is there room for all those same companies to grow and create? Unsure exactly what that means, but I think it's going to be disruptive. So I think if you're in the workforce and you've been doing the same thing for, let's say, 20 plus years, and now there's a much more efficient way to do it, you're going to feel that pain because you might not be interested in learning another job. You might not be interested in modifying things. In fact, I'd say I've spoken with several folks who are kind of like, I'm glad I'm at the tail end of my career because all this new stuff is like, I don't want to deal with it. Now, I think if you're coming out of school and you're getting your first job, it's also disruptive in a sense, right? You're expected to more quickly become, productive, right? And potentially expected to produce more by leveraging tools that haven't existed previously. So I think it's an exciting time and it's a scary time for folks. And the sort of the disruption will happen. And so that will create pain. There'll certainly be winners and losers in a space, right? So if you're working for a company that's a winner in a space, it may be great upside. If you're working for a company that's a loser in a space, it may be more downside than upside.
There's a tendency always for people, and that includes us, to think that we're living in a moment that's so unique and that couldn't possibly have occurred before. So I totally agree with the disruption. There have been plenty of disruptions previously, and the market economy has been able to adjust and figure out. Now, maybe we'll buy into the fact that this is going to happen potentially so fast that the ability to sort of reabsorb and figure it out could create some trouble in that regard. So I sort of buy into that, but I think that water will find its level. I do think very much so for people early in their career or just starting out. I don't know that it's an issue alone of, hey, they got to pick up new technology or these expectations. Heck, generally people think that people earlier in their career are more able to do so. I think there is a little bit of a reluctance in the market right now to hire for the same reasons that people are sort of, frozen and not jumping into AI. I think there's hey, I'm frozen and we're not going to hire because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen here. And I definitely think that that we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown because of that.
That occurs to me as the wrong way to think about it. In other words, like if I look at software development, where probably there's the most disruption in terms of the productivity of the tools, it seems silly to say, well, I'm going to hire less junior developers altogether. If you take a smart person who's able to quickly learn how to leverage the latest tools, arguably you're getting, you're getting more productivity than you'd ever expected. And it's interesting. Like if I just look at us and other software companies that I'm close to, you can't really measure like the productivity, even though like we're using these tools. You can't just say, oh, we're shipping a ton more features much more quickly, right? There's still a bottleneck somewhere in the process. That's not necessarily the code writing part of it. And so you kind of still need you may be getting to prototypes and demos much sooner, but there's still, the process of delivering a true product to the market, which is gated by lots of other things besides, writing lines of code. And the more you can hire talented people early in their career who are aren't necessarily so set in their ways, I think that the more opportunities you've got to kind of accelerate the growth of your company.
Software engineering, whole labor market. I'm thinking about the broad labor market. And if you're in marketing or if you're in supply, it doesn't matter where you are. I think there's a little bit of a, hey, let's think about our hiring right now because we don't know where water's going to find its level in terms of how AI is going to impact. I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's smart. And I agree with your comments, especially in the technology space. But I do think I can feel it a little bit when I talk to clients that that's going on out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the disruption, I guess, is starts early, right? When you're uncertain, as opposed
Right.
to
And I think to the disruption point, I'm probably on the side of ultimately, I think it ends up being really good. I mean, I think was it in the when the printing press was developed, a lot of calligraphers went out of business, right? And so we were all farming 150 years ago, and none of us are farming anymore. So there will be a pretty massive change. And the other thing that strikes me is from just the magnitude of change perspective, I think what we're looking at is probably greater than anything we've seen, at least in our lifetime, probably greater than the industrial age, and it's going to happen faster. So I do think you're going to see there's going to be some displacement for sure. But it does strike me that, okay, there are going to be places where humans, at least right now, it feels like we have there's some unique value. And I'll go back to the Klarna thing that you mentioned, Mike, and what they'll tell you is we realized that the AI was just really not very good at, working with humans that weren't very happy and, that were upset, that needed a little more sort of emotional intelligence. Will the models get better? Maybe. But I do think there's sort of a unique human perspective that we'll lean into, and we'll see probably more jobs where folks are maybe not answering support calls, but maybe proactively helping customers, for example.
I think, that the whole support thing. I mean, I just got to tell you my own experiences sitting. I do this very infrequently. Sit on a line waiting for support to have something.
Well, the minute it says press 1 for this, I'm like, okay, I'm just done.
No, I mean, it's a miserable experience in most cases.
It is a miserable experience,
and that's after you wait a long time. Yeah. So I'm all for automate as much of support processes that just aren't good today. With machines. And I get that on the margins, there are places where a human being would do a much better job than a machine. But that's if you get to the person that actually cares about what, the problem.
Yeah. By the way, I don't think a human, it makes sense to have the human answer that call, but I think you can be triaged through an AI. Yeah. That's sort of the escalation is the human that can really understand.
When you start dropping F-bombs, it's probably time for the AI to transfer the call to a human. Sentiment analysis.
The minute, I can't tell how many times a day I could listen to say, my wife is hitting the star button or saying, "Manager, please."
Yeah.
Whatever automated system.
You just go representative.
Yeah, that's the.
Let's make an agent that helps you get a human.
I would say this. This is because the technology that she's dealing with
Fair enough.
Those are not good agents. Those are just terrible prior implementations of things that were dumb. I think today the expectations you can do a much better job at, because in contrast to that, you also end up yelling at the person on the phone when they transfer you for the fourth time, and you have to re-explain what you just described to the fourth person in the escalation.
Just
so listen, look, if we look, I think we're all agreeing agents are coming. I think we're all agreeing there will be some displacement. How would you advise maybe a young person coming into the workplace, and the other sort of persona would be just somebody in the workplace to how to approach this wave? Jim, what do you think?
Well, this is, we talk about it. The hype, it's overhyped, it's underhyped. The hype cycle is insane. Every day there's a new release of a new LLM or a new tool or a new agent or a new this or a new that, a new product. If you look at sort of what was the list that we just saw, the A16H top 100 tools, how quickly that changes from month to month to month. If I were going to advise someone today, I would say spend all of your professional development time just keeping up with that. If you're willing to stay with that, you're going to be valuable.
Get your hands dirty.
Around
go use this stuff. Don't watch videos. Go sign up for trial accounts. Get your hands dirty. It's all the kids that I mentor. I mean, they're not all kids anymore, but that's my number one piece of advice to them. It started with a phone call 30 months ago when I said, whatever you're doing, start on AI right now.
Drop it.
Drop it. Right? And it's still the hammer today. Get in there, use the stuff. Look, the reason the salaries are so crazy differentiated is because it does take a certain, amount of using the stuff to understand what it can do and what it can't. Be one of the people that understands what it can do instead of on the sidelines wondering how you might ever know.
I got 2 phone calls that came to me. One young woman, daughter of a gentleman I used to work with, trying to figure out how to move forward. And I said, you know what? Start here. Go look at this. Go read this. Go experiment with this. And she did. And actually 3 months later, we hired her. So that's awesome. Incredible. I got another phone call with somebody saying, hey, I'm looking for my next thing, trying to figure it out. And by the way, this was a software engineer. And what was the first, after we sort of got through Old Home Week and just catching up, I knew the individual. I said, tell me how you think AI is going to impact software engineering. I mean, there couldn't have been a bigger softball question. And almost any answer would have been respectable. And the answer I got was, I don't think it's really going to have much impact. And then it was like, can I end the next 27 minutes of this call? Can I get those minutes of my life back? Because there wasn't a conversation to have. I mean, there was no intellectual curiosity or lean in about it.
Yeah.
So, besides the technology, and obviously Mike's advice is good. I would offer the same, which is, get your hands dirty. I think the other thing, early in your career, it's a lot about building networks, building relationships, building people that are also, kind of various stages of their growth in their careers. That advice doesn't change. I don't know that AI has really made that any different than historically, but
I
maybe
agree.
it's easier to connect with folks. But it's not all about just the technology. Like you're trying to find your way, like what's going to fulfill you, right? What are you going to enjoy? Those are important motivators. Ultimately, when you're working late night and you're wondering why you're doing it, you want to make sure you're doing something that you're going to be feel rewarded by at the end.
All right, so we're all agreed the agents are definitely coming, and basically, what's the old saw now? People won't be replaced by AI; they'll be replaced by people who use AI. And I think that's a lot of what we're saying is like, go, all right, be one of those people that are really diving in and get your hands dirty and using this stuff. All right, so the next topic we're going to talk about the AI talent war. So you got companies like Meta paying NBA max salaries for AI folks, and so the question is, so how does that affect the mainstream? Is that just a sort of a frontier model thing? Is it a temporary thing? How should business leaders be thinking about this in terms of how they build their teams and how they recruit people and how they keep people? Alon, I'll start with you. What's your perspective?
There's a lot there. So simplest thing to say is there are some anomalies, right? So the $100 million plus kind of packages, don't aim for that as your goal. I think I think I was listening to the Baidu guy talk about the smart people that he hires in China, and he goes, Silicon Valley doesn't have a monopoly on smart people. We can get people just as smart at a fraction of the price. And so there is sort of a, I guess it's a special case, right? It's an anomaly of what's going on there. However, I think, as Mike was saying before, there is a premium for folks who understand how to apply the current technology. And so I think you could certainly fetch a premium and grow your career if you're tracking kind of the latest and best tools, because you can apply that very productively. So by all means, right, that it's the right place to spend your time. And then in terms of companies, right, there's probably not enough folks right now to meet the demand that companies need. So there is a little bit of, how do I find the people who know the stuff best? So certainly there's a crowded field of people who know something, and then there's, as you go up kind of that pyramid all the way to the AI researchers, you are building value along the way. And it's hard to, for any company to build a staff that is, I guess, competitive with the best of breed companies that are, focused, let's say, on applying technology in that space. So I feel like there will be some arbitrage there in terms of, if I'm an enterprise and I'm trying to build internal expertise, I probably have to lean some on external experts and be thoughtful about how I can groom an internal team, but realize that it's going to take time and effort and a lot of kind of reinforcement over time to keep the right people there.
That's the lever.
Everything in life is a spreadsheet. Doesn't matter what it is. We can think of things of columns and rows. And I agree with all the things we're saying.
Way to look at life, Jim.
It is. And sometimes there's a z-axis also, X, Y, and Z, and it's really a cube. Sometimes even more of that, but then it gets really confusing. But the other thing I would say is, we tend to get focused on technology and the business or sort of this space, the AI space. Companies out there are doing an infinite number of things. Yes, lean into the AI piece, but learn the business. That the intersection of understanding deeply your industry and ultimately, I'm going to use the C word, the context of that business combined with that AI skill. When you're sort of in that cell, it's a fantastic place to be. You don't want to be just a row or just a column.
We talk a lot about context and how important it is to making these things work. And you're right. I think that resonates with me, this idea that, well, I really need people who understand the business, how we make decisions, what context is required to do that, but also understand how these models work. But I think the premium would be on understanding the business and how to drive it forward.
Yeah, it's a great one of those great stories. If you can be in the top 10% in the world in 3 areas, right, which is probably not altogether that hard if you think it's just the top 10% you're shooting for, and you know, then if you're in those 3 areas, you're in the top one. You're in the 0.1% for the intersection of those areas, right? You are a very rarefied commodity, right? This happens when those kids unfortunately got stuck in that cave that flooded in Thailand. There were 2 people in the world that were immunologists who could cave dive, right? And that were qualified to go get those kids out. Elon Musk and all his money was there with all kinds of tech. Nope, the people who got him out were some people who had a really rarefied set of skills. Lots of people dive, lots of immunologists, but very few, not immunologists, anesthesiologists. But the intersection of cave diving anesthesiologists was very small. And I think that's, Jim, that's your cell, right? That's the cell that you're targeting.
Exactly.
Yeah. And look, when the Roman Empire fell, that's the beginning of a lot of great stories, right? When the Roman Empire fell, construction shifted from stone to wood, right? And all of a sudden, these stonemasons were basically out of a job, right? Because they used to have all this money building Roman roads and castles, and now everything's made out of wood because it's just faster and easier and cheaper, right? There wasn't a 1,000 years of treasury behind them. So,
and then the fire department was born.
Well, exactly. So you can imagine those folks. If you can open the yellow pages. I'm sorry, Jim, that's a reference for you, and look for a stonemason today. And you will.
We went from yellow pages to fall of Rome to
right.
So Jim is old.
So you can still hire a stonemason today, right? Even though they peaked 2,000 years ago. There was another brief peak during the 1300s with all the Gothic cathedrals. But the point is, you can still hire those folks now. And they do lots of things, including stonemasonry. And it's really lining up the skills that get you ahead. As somebody that
even touching the Stone Age itself.
Right. Exactly.
Hey, I'm curious, when you guys are interviewing somebody and you're trying to sort of get a sense for the depth of their, AI familiarity, let's just say you got a couple of minutes to sort of make an assessment here. What kind of questions do you ask them, Alon? Let's start with you.
I think the question is it's listening to the answer more. And so, my core question would be, okay, let's talk about, some job or something that you did or something that we want to do. Explain to me how do you apply technology to that? If I'm interviewing for, the skill set of that, and really just listening to the answer and understanding their depth, challenge them on some of the, assumptions or whatever they're stating. So I don't have the question to ask. It's really about listening to knowing where their answer lines, kind of like Jim was saying, right? Like if the answer is, I don't think it affects her, I don't,
yeah,
that's a good way to get out of the interview. But there's a lot of gradient from there.
This is a big change management project. I don't have time for that.
That's right.
Jim, what do you think?
Well, I've got a really direct one that I ask frequently, which is, tell me the last couple things you read. Or what are you reading right now? I'd love to know, personally, what's personally interesting, maybe what you've been reading professionally. I don't really care. Tell me about it and why. And for me, that speaks a lot to their intellectual curiosity.
I used to read a lot of books,
I was going to say
and I would not have an answer to the book question right now. But if you ask me what YouTube videos I was watching, or
I'll update my question.
I was going to say, what percent of your reading is chat responses or deep research responses?
How much time are you spending on Reddit? If it's too much, get out.
I like that.
Literally now, I can't tell you the amount of content that I consume, which is written by AI.
It's unbelievable.
Anything else?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Mike, what you got, man?
Oh yeah, look, it's easy, same as it ever was. You go deep on, you pick the topic, tell me what you want to talk about. Great, let's dive in, let's go, and how far can we dig? And it's easy to figure things out that way. You get a lot of possibilities. Somebody really knows their stuff, and they take you all the way to a place where they teach you something. That's joyful. Immediate hire on that, right? Then you get the other extreme where clearly they're making it up, and it's just too tempting because the money's really high and the jobs are really prestigious. So you get some of those as well. And, somewhere in between is all the people that you need to hire.
Yeah. I think I would just be diving into tell me what tools you're using, right? Do they start with ChatGPT? Do they not say anything? Do they go, oh, I got Claude Code, I'm like, okay, we're sort of at different different level, and I would just dig really deep to make sure
Yeah.
I understood. They really understood it versus just knew the buzzword.
I mean, you guys know that in my responsibilities, we're all working together. I own our go-to-market function in consulting, and this is just sort of to Mike's point about going deep. Not necessarily about AI, but when I'm talking to someone, we're thinking about sort of who would be more selling or more sales oriented in our business. I say, tell me a great sales story, and everybody's got one. They tell me the great, and I'll ask them questions about it and dig into details, and I'll say, tell me another one. And they'll sort of reach and go to the second one, and they think they're done. And I'll say, tell me one more.
Right.
How
And
deep does
now
this go?
now we're 30, 40 minutes into this, and I keep asking. And then they think, okay, we're done. And Mike, to your point about going deep, tell me one more.
Right.
About
Right.
the fourth
Learn
one,
something, yeah.
I'm really sort of forcing them to reach into the bag of tricks. So I love
Yeah.
that go deep, and it's sort of it's shocking to them that I keep asking the same question over and over.
We were
One day when we have time, I'll bore you with 30 sales stories.
we were
Well,
in
He's
an
not even a
early.
sales guy.
That's right. We were in an early dialogue with a customer this week, and kind of doing that sort of probing to see how deep they wanted to go. Right. You don't want to say things they already know, but you want to go deep enough that everybody kind of learns. And at one point, the person on the other side raised their hand and said, "Stop! I want to know what's a weight, what's a context, what's a token, what's a model, what's an agent, what's an LLM, what's a like literally he was
Wow, okay.
conveying that hey,
Yeah.
I'm overloaded
But at the
with all
beginning.
this stuff, right? And
Yeah.
that's the people on the other side of the table that are making the buying decisions, right? So we've got to have people walking into those conversations that are 100% grounded on, hey, there's a reference for you, that are grounded on what's happening in this space, so that they're ready for when they are telling those stories, so that the stories are relevant and tied into that relationship.
Yeah, but and also just able to sort of meet them where they are, right? And be able to say, okay, let's bring it to that level, and we'll sort of get you where you need to go.
Yeah.
Huge respect for that individual raising their hand, sitting in the conversation, saying, "I don't know what the heck you're talking about. Can you fill me in? That's awesome."
That's the vast majority of people, by the way. It's like,
I totally agree.
We sit in a room talking to a lot of people who are technically aware, but I can't tell you how many conversations I've been a part of where, they know about ChatGPT and that's about it.
Right.
Everything else is just two letters. It's AI something, but
yeah, we're very fortunate because we get to spend all our days sort of working on this and thinking about this, and it's hard to sort of remember sometimes when you're walking to a room full of people that don't have that opportunity and just trying to. We
need to recognize that we're all in our own hype cycle of sort of reinforcement or echo chamber.
Sure. So listen, we had these 3 threads. We talked about enterprises struggling to find real use cases, agents reshaping what work looks like and what the talent wars might look like. And hopefully we've given everybody just some great insights from the team. I know it's been a lot of fun. I hope everybody has a great Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you guys on the flip side.